The road was still wet, with the last of the night when the carriage began to run in earnest, and Marianne Vale, thrown hard against the far door with her wrists bound before her, understood at last that no one was coming to make it stop. She had been taken from the yard of Aldecott House before the maids had risen, a hood dragged over her head, a rough hand clamped across her mouth so that her scream died against a stranger's palm. Now the hood was gone, torn loose by the pitch of the coach, and through the shattering blur of the window, she saw the hedgerows tearing past like something coming apart. 2 men rode the box. She did not know their faces. She knew only the smell of them, gin and wet wool, and the way the larger one had laughed when she begged him to say who had sent him. Her bonnet was gone. Her hair had come down across her eyes. She pressed her bound hands to the seat to keep from being flung to the floor, and beneath the drum of her own blood, she heard the coachman shouting to the horses, cracking the whip until the animals screamed, and she realized the fool meant to take the bridge at the bottom of the hill at a gallop. She had crossed that bridge 100 times on foot. It was old and narrow, 1 cart wide, its middle span broken and roped off since the spring floods. A wagon might have crept round the gap. A coach at full flight would go through the rail and into the river 40 feet below. So this was to be no ransom. This was to be an accident. A companion of no fortune and no family, drowned on a lonely road, and no one left in the world to ask too closely why.
The thought did not frighten her the way she expected. It made her very cold and very still, the way she went still over her father's ledgers when the numbers would not lie, and into that stillness came a sound she had not heard before, hoofbeats, a single horse, driven harder than the coach itself, coming up fast along the verge where the ground ran level to the road. She dragged herself up to the broken window. A rider, bareheaded, black-coated, low over the neck of a grey horse that ran as though the ground had caught fire behind it. He came level with the rear wheel, then the door, close enough that she saw his face, hard, pale, a jaw set like a man who had made a decision he did not intend to survive being wrong about. And he saw her, and something in that face changed. "The door!" he shouted over the thunder of it. "Can you reach the door?" She could not answer. She showed him her wrists instead, the cord, and saw him understand in half a breath. The bottom of the hill was coming. She could see the pale ropes strung across the broken span, the black gap of the river beyond. He brought the grey in so close that its shoulder brushed the coach, that she felt the heat of it, and he freed one hand from the reins and held it out to her, across the terrible little distance. A gloved hand, steady where nothing else in the world was steady. "When I say," he called, and his voice did not shake, "you jump. Do you hear me? You do not think. You jump, and I will have you. I give you my word." The ropes were 30 yards off, 20. She got the window down. The wind tore at her. Below the sill, the road ran like grey water, and every sense she owned told her to stay, to cling, to trust the box that at least had walls. His eyes held hers. "Now," he said, "jump." She jumped. For one endless instant, there was nothing under her at all, only the roaring air and the ground reaching up, and then his arm closed round her like an iron band, and the whole weight of her wrenched him half from the saddle, and the grey staggered and screamed, and somehow, God alone knew how, kept its feet and swept them off the road, onto the soft verge, as, behind them, the coach struck the ropes. She did not see it go through. She heard it, a splintering, a long tearing crash. The horse's cry cut suddenly short, and she felt the arm that held her tighten until it hurt, turning her face into his coat so that she should not have to watch. They came to a halt in the wet grass, the horse blowing, the man breathing as though he had run every yard himself. Marianne's cheek was against his heart, and she could feel it slamming, wild and human, entirely at odds with the stone of his face. For a moment, neither of them spoke. His gloved hand had come to rest against the back of her head, holding her there, and she was too shaken to be ashamed of how she clung to him. Then, from somewhere down the hill, past the broken bridge and the ruin in the river, came the sound of a second horse, one of the boxmen, thrown clear, riding hard away into the morning mist. Gone, and with him, the only man alive who could have told her whose money had bought her death, the Duke of Kingsley, for it was he, though she did not yet know it, lifted his head and watched the mist take the rider, and his arm did not loosen from around her, and he said, very low, as much to himself as to her, "Who did you cross, that they would spend so much to be rid of you?" She had no answer she dared give, and that, more than the fall, more than the river, was what made her begin at last to shake. She woke in a bed that was not hers, in a room the size of the whole cottage where she had been born. Grey light lay across a carved ceiling. There was a fire, and the smell of beeswax and old books, and a woman of perhaps 60, sitting very upright in a chair by the hearth with needlework she was not doing. When Marianne stirred, the woman set it aside at once. "There now," she said. "There now, you needn't leap up. You are at Kingsley Hall, my dear, and you are quite safe, whatever anyone tells you about the man who owns it. Kingsley." Marianne knew the name, the way everyone in the county knew it, the way children knew it, lowered to a whisper. The cold Duke. The one who did not come to church, did not sit to dinner, did not dance, had not been seen in London in years. It was said he had ruined a man once and watched him hang. It was said other things, worse things, the way things are always said of a rich man who keeps his door shut. "You are Lady Beatrice Marlowe," Marianne said, for the woman had told her once already, in the blur of the night before, sponging her wrists where the cord had cut. "You are his aunt, his late mother's sister, and the only creature in England he will suffer to scold him." Lady Beatrice smiled, but her eyes were shrewd. "You gave us a great fright, Miss Vale. My nephew carried you in himself, and would let no one else touch you until the surgeon came. And then he stood in the passage the whole night like a sentry. And this morning he is downstairs pretending he did nothing of the sort. So you see, you may believe what you like about the Duke of Kingsley. I have watched him 30 years, and I know better." Marianne's throat closed. She had been alone in the world so long, since her father's ships came home without him, since the fever took her mother, since the counting house of Vale and Ashby had become simply Ashby, and she had been made to understand, gently, relentlessly, that a merchant's daughter, with a diminished portion, had best make herself useful as some lady's companion and be grateful. That plain kindness undid her worse than cruelty ever had. She could not stay. She said so. She had a position, a mistress, duties. Lady Aldecott would be frantic. "Lady Aldecott," said a voice from the doorway, "has been sent word that you are recovering from a carriage accident under my roof, and has replied that she prays for your health and hopes you will not think of returning until you are entirely well." A pause. She did not press the point. I found that interesting. The Duke of Kingsley stood in the door. By daylight, he was younger than the whispers made him, perhaps 35, and harder, and he leaned upon a black cane with a silver head, his weight held off his right leg, in a way that spoke of an old hurt, long past healing. He did not come into the room. He watched her with grey eyes that gave away nothing at all, and Marianne, who had felt his heart go wild against her cheek only hours before, found herself facing a man carved from winter. "You saved my life," she said, because someone had to say it, and it seemed absurd that no one yet had. "I was passing." He said it flatly, as though it settled the matter. "Miss Vale, someone paid 2 men to drive you into the ash at speed and call it an accident. Men like that are not cheap and are not clever. They were hired by someone with money and a reason. I should like to know both. So," he inclined his head the barest degree, "who wants you dead?" The fire snapped. Lady Beatrice looked between them, and Marianne, who suspected, who had, God help her, more than suspected since the moment she saw the broken bridge and understood the elegance of it, heard herself say, "I don't know, Your Grace," and watched something flicker behind those grey eyes that told her he did not believe her for an instant, and would not, she sensed, ever stop until he had the truth she was too frightened to give. She meant to leave within the week. She did not leave. There was, first, the small matter that she had nowhere to go that would have her, Lady Aldercott's silence had begun to look less like delicacy and more like a door quietly closed, and there was the larger matter, unspoken, that beyond the gates of Kingsley Hall, someone with a long purse still wished her in the ground. So she stayed, and the great cold house closed around her, and she began, in spite of herself, to learn it. She learned that the Duke did not sleep. She learned it because she did not sleep either, and in the black hours before dawn, wandering the gallery in a borrowed shawl, she saw the light of his lamp beneath the library door, and once, through the tall windows, she saw him ride out alone into the mist on the grey horse, sitting the saddle beautifully, despite the leg that failed him on the ground, as though only on horseback was he whole. She learned that the servants were not afraid of him. That was the thing that changed her, more than Lady Beatrice's word. A feared man's household is a silent one, but the maids at Kingsley Hall spoke easily, and the old groom argued with him about the horses, and the cook sent up dishes chosen to tempt an appetite the Duke plainly did not have, and no one flinched. A cold master, perhaps, not a cruel one. There was a difference, and Marianne, who had learned to read men the way she read a column of figures, marked it, and she learned the library. She had grown up among ledgers. Her father had set her on his knee and taught her to find the single false entry in a page of honest ones, called her his clever girl, said a head for figures was worth more than a pretty face and would last longer. So when she found the Duke's library and its long shelves of estate books, she could not help herself. She was reading the Michaelmas accounts of a farm she would never see when the door opened and he was there, and she rose in a rush of guilt with the ledger still in her hands. "I beg your pardon," she said. I like the order of them. Numbers do not lie, if you know how to make them speak. My father used to say." She stopped. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed to the fire, slow and even on the cane, and lowered himself into the chair opposite and said, "What was he?" "A merchant, shipping. He died at sea when I was 17. His partner kept the business." She turned the ledger over in her hands, and the accounts, and the house, and everything but the name, which he was generous enough to leave off the door. Something moved in the Duke's face. Not sympathy. She would not have known what to do with his sympathy. Recognition. "I knew a man," he said, "who took everything from someone I loved, and left him the name, so that the disgrace should have somewhere to live. He looked into the fire. I was too late to stop it. I have never been quite in time for anything since." His hand, bare now she noticed, the glove off, a thin white scar crossing the knuckles, closed and opened on the head of the cane. "I do not intend to be too late again, Miss Vale, which is why I will ask you a second time, and go on asking, until you decide to trust me. Who wants you dead?" She stood there in the firelight with the answer trembling on her tongue, and she was on the very edge of it. The name, the counting house, the son she had refused, the accounts she had begun, quietly, to add, when a footman knocked and brought in the evening post on a salver, and on the top of it lay a letter, and she saw the direction on it, and the blood went out of her face. She knew that hand. She had watched it write across the top of her father's ledgers for 10 years. The Duke saw her look. He took the letter, broke the seal himself, read it, and went very still. The particular stillness she was coming to know, the stillness of a man banking a fire. Then he turned it so that she could see the signature at the foot, the elegant, curling flourish, the confident loop of a man who had signed away other people's lives with the same pen. "Your devoted and grieving guardian," the Duke read softly. "Mr. Julian Ashby." He looked up at her. "He writes to reclaim you. He is coming here himself to fetch you home." A pause. "Now, shall we go on pretending you don't know who wants you dead?" She told him everything. That night, in the library with the fire burned low, she told him of Julian Ashby, her father's partner, who had wept so becomingly at the memorial, and then, within the year, made himself her guardian and the master of her fortune both. She told him of the son, Peter, soft, damp-handed Peter, and the marriage that had been pressed on her and pressed again, and how she had refused it, and how the pressing had stopped with a suddenness that had frightened her more than the pressing had. She told him, last and lowest, of the ledgers. "I was raised on them. I could not help but look. My portion, the trust my father left, that I am to have at 25, or on my marriage. The sums that come in do not match the sums my father set down. There is money going out to names I do not know.
Shipments that never sailed. I began to keep my own reckoning in the back of my mother's psalter, where no one would think to look. Her voice did not shake now. It had gone flat and certain, the ledger voice. I think Julian Ashby has been robbing my trust for 8 years. I think that when I refused his son, he understood that one day soon I should be free and married and looking at the books with a husband's lawyer beside me. And I think he decided that a drowned girl asks no questions. The Duke had not moved through all of it. Now he said, "Where is the Psalter?" Sewn into the lining of my old travelling case at Aldecott House. She pressed her hands together. "Which is why I cannot simply hide here forever, Your Grace. The only proof I have is a mile from the man who wants me dead, and the moment he understands I mean to fight rather than flee, he will burn it, and me with it." For a long moment the Duke said nothing. Then he rose and went to the window and stood looking out at the dark lawn with his weight on the cane. And when he spoke, his voice had changed. There was something underneath it now, something old and banked and dangerous. "My steward, Colvin, is a discreet man and a clever one. He will go to Aldecott House on an errand of my invention and bring your case away before morning." He turned, "and he will make certain inquiries in certain taverns about 2 men and the money that hired them. Money leaves a trail, Miss Vale. You of all people know that." She stood.
"Why?" she said. "Why do this for me? You said yourself you were only passing. You owe me nothing." He looked at her across the low red light, and for the first time since she had woken in his house, she saw the winter in his face crack clean through, and what was underneath was not cold at all. "Because I have spent 11 years being too late," he said. "Sit down, Miss Vale. Whatever this is, you are not to face it alone. I find I cannot allow it." She sat, and 2 mornings later, Colvin came back through the fog with a mud-splashed coat and a travelling case and a face like a man who has looked at something he cannot yet explain, and he asked to speak to the Duke alone, and the Duke went very still, and Marianne, watching from the top of the stairs, felt the whole cold house hold its breath. What Colvin had learned, she was not told at once, and the not telling sat between her and the Duke like a third person at the table. But a change had come over the house. Grooms she did not know began to appear about the grounds, big quiet men who touched their hats and watched the road. The gates were kept shut, and the Duke, who had been careful never to be alone with her longer than propriety allowed, now sought her out, to walk with her in the long gallery when the weather kept them in, to sit with her over the estate books she loved, to teach her, of all things, the history of every portrait on the walls, as though he had decided that if she must be a prisoner, she should at least be a well-instructed one.
She told herself it was the danger that made them close. She was lying, and she knew it, in the way her breath caught when his sleeve brushed hers over a ledger, in the way she had begun to listen for the uneven fall of his cane in the passage, and to feel the day turn grey when she did not hear it. One afternoon of thin autumn sun, he took her out into the walled garden, moving slowly along the gravel, and stopped by a stone bench beneath a bare pear tree, and drew from his waistcoat a watch. It was a fine old watch, gold, worn smooth. He did not open it to tell the hour. He held it in his bare-scarred hand and looked at it, and Marianne saw that the hand stood still, frozen at 11 minutes past 4. "My father," he said, "was the best man I have ever known, and the worst judge of other men. He trusted his affairs to a fellow he thought a friend, a clever, smiling fellow, with a gift for figures much like your own, Miss Vale, though he used his to a very different end. Over 7 years that man hollowed out everything my father had, forged his hand, sold what was entailed, and hid it under names that did not exist. And when it came out all at once As such things do, my father was ruined, not merely in his purse. In the eyes of every man he had ever looked in the face, he could not bear it. He turned the watch over. On the back, engraved, she saw a device, not a crest, a simple thing, a heron. I was 22 and away at the time, and when the letter reached me, I rode for home through a night like the end of the world.
I knew the road. I had ridden it 1,000 times. His jaw worked. There is a place where it drops to a ford. My horse went down in the dark and rolled, and I woke 3 days later with this leg, and my father already 3 days in his grave. He died at 11 minutes past 4 in the morning, alone, while I lay in a ditch a half-mile off. His hand closed round the watch. It stopped when he did. I have never let it be mended. I find it instructive. It reminds me what happens when I am slow. Marianne looked at the frozen watch, and at the scarred hand around it, and at the leg that would never again let him walk without pain. And she understood at last the whole shape of the man, that he was not cold, he was careful, that he had built the winter around himself because he had loved once, wholly, and arrived 4 days too late, and had decided it was safer never to run for anyone again. And he had run for her, at full speed, down a hill, toward a broken bridge, for a stranger. She did not think. She put out her bare hand. She had forgotten her gloves. She had been forgetting them for days, and she laid it over his, over the watch, over the scar, and she felt him go rigid at the touch, felt the breath stop in him. "You were not slow today," she said. "You had me. You gave me your word, and you had me." He looked down at her hand on his, as though he did not know what it was, and then, very slowly, as if it cost him more than the fall had, he turned his hand beneath hers, so that their palms met, bare skin to bare skin, in the middle of the cold garden, where anyone might see, and neither of them moved to let go. "Miss Vale?" he began, low, and from the house came Lady Beatrice's voice, sharp with something that was not quite fear, calling her nephew's name, and when they reached the terrace, she was holding a card on a salver, and her face was white, and she said, "He is here. He has come himself. Mr. Ashby is in the blue drawing room, and he has brought a magistrate, and he says he has come to take his ward home." Julian Ashby rose when Marianne entered, and held out both hands as though he would embrace her, and the sheer, smooth grief on his face was so perfect that for one lurching moment, even she almost doubted herself. "My dear child," he said. "My dear, dear child. When they told me you had been thrown from a coach, I could not sleep for terror. And to think you have lain here all this while among strangers." His eyes moved once about the room. The height of it, the gilt, the arms above the chimney, and something calculating passed behind the grief, and was gone. "You must come home at once." Peter has been beside himself. The magistrate, a stout, uneasy man named Pettigrew, who plainly wished himself anywhere else, cleared his throat and murmured that Mr. Ashby was indeed the young lady's legal guardian, that the documents were quite in order, that his grace would surely not wish to detain a gentleman's ward against the law. The Duke had said nothing. He stood by the window with his weight on the cane, and he was looking at Julian Ashby with an expression Marianne had not seen on him before. Not cold, not careful, hungry. He was looking at Ashby the way a man looks at a face he has been trying to remember for 11 years and has, at last, in the worst possible moment, remembered.
"Your documents," the Duke said. His voice was very quiet. "May I see them?" Ashby, all confidence, gestured to the magistrate, who laid the papers out upon the table. The Duke crossed to them slowly. He did not read the words. Marianne watched him and saw that he read only one thing: the signature at the foot, the elegant curling flourish, the confident loop. "Julian Ashby," the Duke said, as if tasting it. "It is a good name. Did you buy it or invent it?" The room went still. "Your Grace," said Ashby, with a small puzzled laugh, "I don't take your meaning. There is a way a man makes the capital letter of his own name," the Duke said, "that he cannot unlearn, however many names he takes. A little heron's neck in the loop of it. I have a watch with a heron on the back of it, sir. It belonged to my father. You will remember my father. You forged his hand across the whole of Northamptonshire before you drove him into his grave, and you did it with that very flourish which I have had 11 years to study." He looked up. "Everett Sowerby, I wondered where you had gone to ground." Marianne heard the magistrate say, "Good God," very faintly. She heard the fire. She heard most of all the change in Julian Ashby, Everett Sowerby. As the grief slid off his face, all at once, like a mask taken down, and beneath it was nothing warm at all, only a quick, cold cleverness. The same cleverness she knew from the false entries in her father's books, and she understood that she had lived 8 years in the house of the man who had murdered this man's father, as surely as if he had used a pistol. "You cannot prove a flourish," Sowerby said softly, and he was not smiling now. "No," the Duke agreed, "but she can prove the money." And he turned to Marianne, and there was something almost like triumph in his grey eyes, and it was for her. "Tell him, Miss Vale, what you have sewn into the lining of a Salter. Tell him what Colvin traced through 3 banks and a shipping office that has not sent a ship to sea since your father died. Tell him whose hand paid 2 men in a tavern in Kettering to drive you into the ash." For one heartbeat, Sowerby's composure held. Then his hand went inside his coat, and Lady Beatrice cried out, and the quiet big men who had been watching the road came through the door, and everything happened at once. Afterward, Marianne could never set the next minutes in their proper order. She remembered Sowerby's arm locking round her throat and the cold press of a small pistol at her temple, and his voice, no longer smooth, hissing that he would have her out of the house and gone, that no one would follow if they valued her life. She remembered the Duke's men gone still as stones. She remembered the Duke himself, 4 steps away, with the whole winter come back into his face, and, underneath it, a terror so raw that she understood he was not seeing her at all in that moment. He was seeing a night 11 years gone, a road in the dark, a thing he had failed to reach in time. Sowerby dragged her backward through the door, into the hall, toward the great front steps where a chaise stood waiting with a driver he had kept in reserve. For he had always kept something in reserve. That was how such men lived so long.
The cold air hit her, the gravel, the horses stamping. "You will let us pass," Sowerby called back into the house, "or the county will find her in a ditch after all." And Marianne, pressed against the man who had robbed her father, killed by degrees the Duke's, and tried twice now to have her drowned, felt, beneath her fear, the old flat stillness come over her, the ledger stillness, the place where numbers did not lie, and neither, in the end, did men. She had leapt once from a moving coach into nothing at all, because a stranger had told her he would have her. She looked across the steps and found the Duke's eyes, and she saw him understand what she meant to do, half a breath before she did it, saw the naked animal fear in him, saw him already moving. She let her knees go and dropped, a dead weight, straight down out of Sowerby's grip, the way no lady is ever supposed to move, the way a drowning girl learns to move, and the pistol went off, over her head, into the stone, and before Sowerby could take a fresh hold, the Duke was on him. For a man who could not walk without a cane, the Duke of Kingsley crossed those 4 steps like something loosed. He did not fight cleverly. He fought like 11 years of arriving too late, and it was terrible, and it was brief. When his men pulled him back, Sowerby was on the gravel with the pistol spun away into the flower beds, and his fine coat torn at the shoulder, and his cleverness at last entirely gone, and the magistrate Pettigrew, stammering, was fumbling out the words of a lawful arrest.
But the Duke was not looking at Sowerby. He had turned, in the same motion, and found Marianne where she had fallen on the cold steps, and he went down onto his bad knee beside her without any care at all for what it cost him, and he took her face in both his bare hands, both of them, ungloved, scarred and shaking, and searched it, her eyes, her throat, her temple where the pistol had been. "You dropped," he said. His voice was wrecked. "You dropped out of his hands. Do you know what when the pistol—" He could not finish it. His thumbs moved over her cheekbones as though to be sure she was truly there and whole. "Never," he said. "Never again. Do you hear me, Marianne? I cannot. I have buried the practice of it, this caring, for 11 years, and you walked into my house out of a river and dug it up in a fortnight, and I will not put it back. I will not." They were on the front steps of Kingsley Hall in the raw autumn morning, before his aunt and his servants and a magistrate and the ruined man being led away, and it was the least private place in the county, and he did not seem to know it or care. "Then don't," Marianne said, and her hand came up and closed over his bare wrist, and it was the easiest word she had ever spoken. They were married at the little church at the edge of the park, the one it was said the Duke of Kingsley never entered, on a morning when the frost lay silver on the lawns and burned off gold by the time the bells rang. He came to church after all, in the end. He came leaning on the silver-headed cane, and Lady Beatrice wept without the least dignity and did not care, and the servants filled the back pews because they had asked to, every one, and Colvin stood up beside the Duke as his man and looked as proud as if he had arranged the whole affair, which, in a manner of speaking, he had. Julian Ashby, Everett Sowerby, went before the assizes at Northampton, and the Psalter came out of the lining of the travelling case and lay upon the bench with Marianne's small, clear reckoning in the back of it in her own hand. 8 years of robbery set down in a column that did not lie, and it hanged him. The trust her father had left her came back to her, most of it, from the places Colvin had run it to ground. But it was not the money that Marianne stood longest over on the morning it was restored. It was a single line in her own girlhood writing, the first entry she had ever made in secret, the one that had begun to save her life before she knew she needed saving. Her father had been right. A head for figures had lasted longer than any pretty face, and had, in the end, outlasted the man who thought a clever girl too small a thing to fear. She grew into the great cold house, and it stopped being cold. That was not a thing that happened in a day, and she would not have believed that first grey morning she woke in the too large bed, how ordinary the miracle of it would come to feel, how the winter went out of the place a room at a time.
She took the estate books in hand, and the tenants learned to bring their troubles to a duchess who could find the false figure in a bailiff's page and the honest man behind an unlucky harvest, and the Duke let her, and watched her do it with a look on his face that the old servants said they had not seen since he was a boy. She filled the library of an evening. She learned his silences and taught him, slowly, that not every one of them had to be kept alone. And one autumn night, a year on, in the firelit library where she had first laid her bare hand over his, he took the gold watch from his waistcoat and set it in her palm, the heron worn smooth on the back of it, the hands still frozen, at 11 minutes past 4. "I have carried it stopped for a dozen years," he said, "to remind me what I lost by being slow. I find I no longer need reminding." His scarred fingers closed her hand around it. "Will you have it mended, Marianne? I can bear for it to start again. I think, if you are the one to start it." She had it mended. It sits now on the mantel of the library at Kingsley Hall, and it keeps good time, and on the morning their first child was born, it was the sound she heard beneath the small new cry, the steady ticking of a thing that had once been stopped by grief, going on now and on, in a warm house full of light. Sometimes, in the golden part of a morning, they walk out into the walled garden by the stone bench under the pear tree, and he leans upon his cane, and she keeps his slow pace, as though there were nowhere in the world she would rather be going quickly, and she slips her bare hand into his gloved one, the way she did that first cold afternoon, and he still, even now, closes his fingers over hers, as though he has caught something falling, as though there is a part of him that will always be riding down a hill at full speed with his heart in his throat, holding out his hand across a terrible little distance, willing a frightened stranger to trust him and jump. And I wonder, as I sit here by the fire and turn the last of it over for you, if it had been you in that runaway coach, with the broken bridge below and a stranger's steady hand held out through the roaring air, would you have found the courage to let go of the walls and leap, or would fear have kept you clinging to the thing that was already lost? Tell me, truly, in the comments. I so love to read what you would have done, and if this story warmed you even a little, stay with me a while longer, subscribe, and settle in by the fire, for there is always another tale of the Tun, another guarded heart, and another impossible love, waiting just on the far side of the next cold and glittering night.